Forget about investigation and litigation and evidence. People are going to get killed. People are going to die if this thing passes because ELDs were implemented for a reason, to cut down on crashes. And by the way, they work. There's been a significant drop off, if you look statistically, in fatigue related crashes, and something that's anecdotally I've seen in my practice. I think this is a terrible idea to slide backwards and start letting people go back to paper logs. My name is Jordan Jones. I'm an attorney with Los Angeles Truck Accident Lawyers.
I'm Diana Diskin with Los Angeles Truck Accident Lawyers.
Welcome to Break for Justice.
In this episode, how proposed electronic logging device exemptions could increase fatal trucking crashes.
So a lot of people are asking about the Federation of Professional Truckers application to be exempt from electronic logging devices. That has major implications for safety. It's a lot more than a tweak, as it's being coined, and we have a lot to say about that. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm here with my law partner, Diana Diskin, and we have a very special guest, a trucking lawyer from Michigan named Alex Kemp. He's a very good friend of ours, handles catastrophic trucking cases just like Diana and myself. And we have a lot of ground to cover today. This is a big deal, this exemption. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in.
What exactly is being proposed here at the federal level?
The federal level, what's being proposed is the Federation of Professional Truckers. It's essentially a big professional association. They are asking for motor carriers to be exempt from using ELDs and to basically go back to paper logs. The program is open. Anybody who wants to opt into the program can do so. And the basis for asking for this exemption is essentially, number one, it's very expensive, especially for smaller motor carriers. Number two, that they malfunction a lot. And then number three, paper logs are fine for federal enforcement, for regulatory enforcement from the DOT. So those are kind of their arguments in favor of doing that.
And this isn't hypothetical. This is an active federal rulemaking process that's happening right now.
Why were ELDs created in the first place?
A lot of people don't realize the hours of service rules existed long before ELDs. The whole purpose of ELDs is to monitor drivers and to make sure that they are complying with hours of service rules. Hours of service rules just prevent fatigue drivers on the road. We don't want tired drivers driving on the road because ultimately that's what can cause accidents. So a long time ago, rules were put in place to make sure that these drivers abide by certain hours of service rules. And it's the requirement of their motor carrier, their employer, to make sure that they are following those rules. One of the reasons why we transitioned from paper logs to ELDs is simply compliance. Congress found that there wasn't enough compliance with paper logs as compared to actual ELDs. The ELDs give us an actual verification process to confirm what the driver was actually doing, where he was doing it, and when he was doing it. At the end of the day, it prevents someone from falsifying what they were actually doing and where they were driving. The issue wasn't the rules, it's that they weren't being followed consistently. And ELDs were the federal government's solution to that enforcement gap.
If there was already rules in place about the hours of service, and Congress wanted to introduce these electronic logs to track people and make sure they're actually doing what they were doing. I mean, why is that any different? How does having an electronic log versus a paper log make people more inclined to follow the rules?
Well, an electronic log actually preserves the data. So imagine a paper log is just somebody putting in their hours in handwriting. They can easily start that paper over again. They can erase it. They can write over it. They can fudge it. They can make it look fuzzy. Paper logs were easy to falsify. Electronic logs, you've got a set system in the truck connected to the truck itself so that you know exactly where that driver is, and they have to input exactly what they're doing, and you can follow that data through the system.
What about the argument that, well, you can still cheat electronic logs? So if people are going to cheat, they're going to cheat, and all you're doing is passing on a cost to small motor carriers that ultimately is going to get absorbed by the consumer. How do we respond to that?
When we talk about cheating, we should make cheating as hard as possible. We want to make sure that the drivers are actually complying with the rules. And if it's harder to cheat, that's ultimately going to lead to more compliance and safer roads.
If we look back historically, People would edit the paper logs, but the bigger issue is people had two logbooks. That was like, there was kind of like the joke in the industry was you had your logbook and then you had your comic book. Right? Your comic book is the one you showed to the DOT officer that made everything look all good, and then your actual logbook, because these guys get paid by the mile, right? That actually track your mile and what you actually drove. That's what they would turn in to get paid off of. And the problem was, the DOT stops you and someone hands you a logbook and you look, it's all good. That's kind of as far as you can really go at that point, absent, getting fuel receipts or something like that. Electronic logs, Diana's point, they plug right into the engine. You can, if the engine's running, the engine's running. You can't cheat the engine, right? Now, what a lot of truck drivers, well, unfortunately, I shouldn't say a lot. It's a minority of bad actors. What they do is they just unplug the log from the engine. But even then, that's still helpful for law enforcement because they pull your log and you're going to see the engine's disconnected. They're going to see the engine's disconnected. And then, the officer, well, why is the engine disconnected? What's going on here, right? So someone who's going to cheat is going to cheat. But the argument, I think, for public safety is it's a lot harder to get away with it if you're running on an e-log versus the paper log.
We have one where a driver was driving for over 20 hours and he was just flipping between his credentials on the ELD and his co-driver's credentials on the ELD. And fortunately, by the time the crash happened, he was so tired, he admitted this to the police. But these things do happen. Cheating is possible, but again, these things are, not always easy to catch, but they are catchable. And they are investigatable. And so we can find when this happens, we can see the clues when it's happening, and it's a lot easier to find than, a paper logbook.
Yeah, we have another one where the guy has a co-driver, but he's on a solo trip. So it's just him in the truck, and he's, left California, he drives up to Arizona, and he's got a co-driver. And it's I won't use the gentleman's real name, but say his name is one guy is Michael Smith on the ELD, and then his co-driver's name is M Smith. So he's just they're both him. He's just using it so if he gets stopped.
I have a case right now where there are co-drivers and they are inputting actually each other's names, which is inconsistent with the telematic data of who's actually driving. So we're seeing inconsistencies there between the ELDs and the telematic data of the co-driver versus the actual driver. And it's leading to, obviously, they're trying to go above and beyond the hours of service and to make sure that a certain driver is actually in compliance when it's the other person that's driving. So they are trying to cheat and they are cheating as well, but they're not getting away with it. And it's harder for them to get away with it with the ELDs.
Yeah. Forget about investigation and, litigation and evidence. Just people are going to get killed. People are going to die if this thing passes because this ELDs were implemented for a reason to cut down on crashes. And by the way, they work. There's been a significant drop off. If you look statistically in fatigue related crashes and something that's anecdotally I've seen in my practice, I think this is a terrible idea to slide backwards and start letting people go back to paper logs.
I've seen the same thing in my practice, just an overall reduction in fatigue-related crashes. So it really is working. And like you said, the data does support that as well.
Are either one of you seeing people abusing the special statuses like a yard move or personal conveyance? Are you all seeing anything like that?
I have in the past. I can't think of any case that we've got going on right now with that, but I've seen that in the past. And I think that the ELDs are a lot easier for us as, when we're investigating or litigating. I think it's a lot easier to use the ELDs to our advantage.
Oh, for sure. And a lot easier for law enforcement too, because the law enforcement, if you're on a paper log, like the DOT officer doesn't have time to sit there and audit your fuel receipts and audit your bill of lading and match it all up. The ELD, you can look really quickly and check. And then also, I don't think I have any active cases going right now where someone was abusing the special statuses, but I've seen it before. I had a guy, he was driving on a personal conveyance with a loaded truck for 200 miles. So what kind of a personal conveyance were you going on for 200 miles, right? Or people do a yard move. A yard move is intended if you're literally moving the truck around the yard. And it's people will be driving 40, 50 miles. Say, how big is your yard? You must have the biggest, your yard's the size of an airfield or what? This is just crazy. So, I've seen some stuff like that going on. But again, It's a lot easier to detect because the DOT is going to look, he's going to say, why you want a personal conveyance for 200 miles? That doesn't make sense, right? So it's just, makes it a lot easier, I think, from an enforcement side.
Yeah, it's not just the driver actually complying with the law, it's that we can actually verify that they complied with the law.
Exactly. And there's deterrence. If you know you're going to get popped, then hopefully you won't do it, right?
In ELD, it doesn't have an opinion. It doesn't have a motivation. It doesn't have a reason to lie. People have reasons to lie, but ELDs actually verify what the driver was doing.
So what happens if this exemption actually passes? Well, it's going to make it a lot harder for us to investigate cases. It's going to make it a lot harder for us to litigate these cases. And it's going to make it a lot easier for motor carriers to put pressure on their drivers to go places faster in violation of the federal motor carrier safety rules.
So any driver at any time could decide they don't want to use ELDs and they want to go back to the old ways to manipulate data with the paper logs.
They're saying about the cost, it's like $500. I think safety is worth $500 many, many, many times over. And number two, their argument is about the ELDs malfunction. In reality, the only time it malfunctions is when somebody manually unplugs it, first of all. But number two, even if it does malfunction, as the law exists now, you're allowed to go to a paper log if your e-log is broken.
Actually required to go to a paper log.
Yeah. So if your e-log's broken, you can write on a paper log anyways. What's the third argument they're making again? Oh, that law enforcement doesn't understand it. So what do you mean? It's like, because the printout is like the exact same as the old red and white paper log you would it's like literally the exact same thing, except it's like a computer printout instead of like someone like with a pencil like drawing a line by hand, but literally it's identical. How does this affect truck accident cases? So the nice thing about ELDs is that if there's a violation, management gets a notification in real time that goes straight to the safety director, so they can look into it and reach out to the driver, say, hey, get off the road. And if they don't do that, then that management is in on it too, because they have a duty under the regs to make sure their drivers are following the rules, and they have a duty under the regs to enforce the rules within their company. So that kind of eliminates their ability to do that.
I think the biggest part about the litigation process is just discovering the truth. What exactly happened? And ELDs help us discover the truth. So if someone is wanting to no longer use ELDs, it's almost like they're trying to hide the truth. And that's a problem.
On the litigation side, another really important thing to keep in mind is always get the audit trail from the ELD, because you can manually go in and edit the logs. And that happens sometimes, like somebody forgets to change their status or whatever the case may be. There are legitimate reasons, but sometimes what people will do is they go in there to conceal their fraud or their violations. So make sure you're getting the audit trail for litigation purposes. You can see who made the changes, and ostensibly what the purpose was, and you can investigate and dig into that too.
And that's the best part about ELDs is there actually is an audit trail, right? With paper logs, there is no audit trail. I've had cases where they say we store our company documents and our paper logs in the shed in the back, and lo and behold, the shed burned down before litigation and we couldn't get any of the paper logs. So that doesn't happen if they actually have ELDs. That data is actually preserved. An audit trail is there to see what happened if there were any edits, like you said.
It's amazing how many trucking companies have fires in their storage facilities. It's really shocking.
The odds are astronomical. So if you're an attorney who's never dealt with any paper logs before, what are you getting yourself into, or what do you need to know about paper logs? When you're reviewing paper logs, a biggest thing to look at is the 4 areas of how the driver can classify their driving time. There are 4 different areas. There's the driving, there's the on duty, there's the off duty, and the sleeper berth. But it's not just the driver logging what they did and when they did, but it's also were there any changes to that? Are you looking for different color pens or different color pencils? Were there changes to that? That's going to be a little different than in a computerized ELD printout where someone can actually make written changes to a paper log versus a computer log.
The other thing about paper logs is that in addition to different color pens, you also need to differentiate between the handwriting between your driver and your co-driver. So going back to paper logs is going to mean potentially that you're going to have to get a handwriting expert to try to see what the difference is and parse out who was writing what and when.
Yeah, I mean it's 2026, and technology's never been better at any time in human history, and it feels like we're going backwards, and the reasons just quite frankly don't make any sense to me. I mean, ELDs cost about $500. That seems like a very, very small price to pay for safety and potentially saving lives. To the extent ELDs malfunction, you're allowed to use paper anyways if your ELD really and truly breaks. And then number three, it's just a lot easier for law enforcement. It's so much easier for them to look and detect cheating than it is on the paper. In the litigation context, if don't forget, ELDs have really only been around for about 8 years, right? So if you're like a 3 or a 4 or 5 year lawyer, you didn't know any other way, right? But like what you had to do like in the early 2000s, like is you had to like get the bill of lading, the fuel receipts, any receipts for like meals, rest breaks, hotels, and you had to like kind of construct a timeline based on the receipts and then check it against the log. And you would look for discrepancies. So you'd be like, well, hold on, at 1 a.m. your log says you're in Virginia, but you have this fuel receipt from Oklahoma, or like you kind of like do things like that, right? And that's how you would expose the cheating. And you can do it. It's just extremely time consuming. It's very inefficient. It takes a lot of motion practice, and then as a practical matter, I mean, the driver's not always going to have that stuff, right? Now, one thought that does occur to me now is I think what we could probably do now is just with the rise of cell phones and things like that, you might be able to like get cell phone records and kind of match it roughly off the tower, and then you can use that against the log audit, or excuse me, you can use that to audit based against the logs. That's not something I had personally done before we switched over, but that's something that kind of jumps out to me and just a thought in case this does get approved.
That's pretty onerous to have to do. Sometimes you have to subpoena the cell phone company. You have to get the cell tower data. And depending on how long it's been, you might not be able to get that anymore.
One thing we should remember is this was from the MAP 21 in 2012 when this started passing, or when this passed and then went into effect in late 2017. But it was literally called moving ahead for progress in the 21st century. So if we were moving ahead for progress to start using ELDs, why would we ever go backwards to then allow drivers to use paper logs? It makes no sense at all. So why does all this matter? This isn't just about individual drivers. It's about the safety systems that govern the entire trucking industry. This isn't just about trucking regulations. It's about safety on the roads we all share. We have to remember that behind every hours of service violation or fatigue crash, that's someone's mother or someone's father or someone's coworker that's getting injured because of fatigue, because hours of service violations. And we can help prevent that and reduce the carnage on the roadways, reduce the suffering that people go through these crashes if we reduce the hours of service violations. And we can do that by actually having ELDs. We're going to have and continue to have more crashes on the road if we allow drivers to go back to paper logs. The data has shown that paper logs don't work. ELDs have been working. They're not perfect, but they're certainly much better and more efficient than paper logs in preventing crashes and keeping people safe.
So the way the process works is the proposal gets submitted to the FMCSA, and then as part of the rulemaking process, they open it up to public comments. Our law firm, Diana and I, we felt very strongly this is a bad idea. We wrote a letter, co-signed it, and submitted it. I believe Alex's firm did as well separately. I think there was something like 900 comments submitted in response to this one. This was a pretty popular one. But this is just not a good idea. It's a bad idea. The risks, the potential devastation far outweighs the $500 a year that folks are going to save on their ELD devices. I think this is something really scary that we should all be concerned about. And I don't mean we all lawyers. I mean everybody who drives on the road, everybody who's got family who drives on the road every day. These rigs weigh 80,000 pounds, and trucking's a hard job. And there's a lot of industry pressure to cheat the hours of service. A lot of times the drivers are put in bad positions by the companies or the brokers. The brokers are some of the biggest villains of all in all this, in my opinion. This is meant to safeguard us and keep us safe, and we need to keep it there.
I think that Jordan and I both feel very strongly that it's incredibly important for lawyers to speak out when they see rules like this or laws coming out or even case law coming out that is potentially harmful to the public. In the past, we've even submitted briefs to higher courts here in California to try to get decisions reconsidered, decisions that were in cases that were handled by other attorneys, but that have an effect on all of us and could really harm the public because it allows trucking companies, brokers, and other participants in the transportation chain to be looser, to be less safe with what they're doing and put all of us at risk on the road.
One of the arguments about the ELD mandate is they can't afford $500 a year. But the bigger question is, and the red flag it raises is, well, if they can't afford the $500 a year for an ELD, what else can't they afford? Can they afford to properly train their drivers? Can they afford to properly maintain their vehicles? It's a real concern that these companies that are claiming that they can't afford a $500 ELD for a truck are the ones trying to lead this and they want to go back to paper logs. And that's the glaring red flag here. If they can't afford $500, maybe they shouldn't be in the trucking industry. This is about safety at the end of the day.
So, we're a law firm, but more than anything, we're safety advocates. And we always put our money where our mouth is. Diana and I, that's something that's super important to us. We submit public comments on rules like this. We try to help with legislative efforts. We work with nonprofits that help people who've been victims of truck wreck cases. And that's the bigger thing. That's why we do what we do, to reform safety. And for any lawyers who are listening out there, one thing that I've been trying to do with, admittedly marginal success, but it's trying to negotiate safety reforms as part of settlements. I think that's a lot easier to do when you're dealing with, smaller companies. Like if you're dealing, with Walmart or FedEx or, I don't know, one of the big boys, Werner. I mean, forget it. It's just, it's not going to happen. But hey, maybe you have like a smaller company that's got 20 trucks or 30 trucks, and you can negotiate that in. You say, hey, you have to implement this, or you got to do this, or you got to do that as part of the settlement. That can make a really big difference, and it adds up. It adds up over time. So I think that's something we can all do to try to help improve things as well.
Thanks for listening to Break for Justice. Visit us online at trucklawyers.com.